Okay.
College
Yeah.
is getting much active.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. So we ended off last week. We had ended off with the first step, so to speak, of what we're gonna, how we have to train ourselves to think, to live in a world where we connect to Hashem, where we truly have this relationship that we live with Hashem. And the exercise that was given, the suggestion was 3 times a day to think there is a creator in the world. That was the exercise that was given. Okay, morning, afternoon, and evening, when you wake up, before you go to bed, somewhere in the middle of the day. That way, it's constant on our minds. I don't know if anybody tried the exercise. I'll tell you, I did get an email from David Loburn, who's not here right now, but he said that he unfortunately is in California right now. But he said he did the exercise and it was powerful. I didn't get too much information, but he felt it was powerful. Anybody else want to share something? How it went?
I did it.
And yeah.
Although I didn't do it when I woke up in the morning. How am I supposed to remember when I first woke up? What There's enough going on.
You didn't have your coffee yet. So nothing works yet.
But I would find that at random times in the day, it would just pop into my head. And I said it, I didn't remember it the way you said it. I just said to myself, God created this world all around. I'm sorry, a variation.
Perfect. That's perfect. And how did it feel?
It felt like, I don't know if people had this experience. You're in an exercise class, and so every experience, and they say, "Now everybody stop, deep breath." And it's like the world. Something happened. I don't want to be too mystical about it, but it was a very nice experience. Driving, once I did just watching television,
Unbelievable.
like everybody slowed down and moved a few steps away.
Unbelievable. That's fantastic. And that's what it is. That's really what it is. It's the thoughts are not supposed to be burdensome in a way that I'm stressed out and I have to think about it and I have to think about it. It's supposed to start to become just natural part of who we are. Thinking about Hashem is not supposed to be something that we call to our imagination when we open a siddur, and then when we're close a siddur, our imagination dispels Hashem, and then next time we do something, or it brings it in. He's there all the time. And it's just a matter of consciousness, of consistently reminding ourselves, telling ourselves, working on it, and practicing over and over. Hashem created the world. God created the world. There is a creator who created everything around it. We're going to talk more about the part of the around me part today. But that's what it is. That's really what it is. So I'm so happy that you had that experience. It's fantastic. Now, just that we have to keep in mind a rule. There's a rule that comes, it's true for everything spiritual that we do. It's true for everything, let's call it physical or tangible that we do in our financial lives, in our relationships, in our service to Hashem. This rule applies to everything. Okay? It's a bit of a strange dichotomy that we have. That is that there's something, what the Sfarim call, it's something called his arusa de lesato and his arusa de la'ela. The word his arusa means his orus is inspiration, and lesata means down here, and la'ela means up there. So there's an inspiration down here. There's an inspiration upstairs in Shemayim, in heaven, so to speak. Okay, our inspiration that we have down here, those are the actions that we do. We remind ourselves there's a creator. We go to work to make a livelihood. We engage in relationships with our family members and our friends. Those are the things that we do. But the second part, which is probably the most important part, the fact that there is some sort of success in any one of those areas, the fact that we can accomplish something in any one of those areas, that's what's called hisarusa de la'ela. That comes from the support and the inspiration that comes from Shemayim, from heaven. Human beings, by nature, if we could take out godliness from us from the picture for a moment, then we are very feeble, weak beings. We can't really accomplish much on our own. Many times, you can think about yourself, I know for myself personally, things that I've tried to do, and I wanted to do them, I have this inspiration to do it, and after a week it's done. Right? And I'm like, it could have been Mr. America if I would have just kept my diet for the past 6 years that I've been trying to start every other day, right? We all know what that's like, okay, whatever it might be. So it's very hard for us on our own by ourselves to be able to push and push and push and fully complete something. It's very infrequent that that happens. The only way that things truly get completed is if we realize that it's coming from Hashem also. And the reason why we did what, let's call it our hishtadlus, our part, we did our portion of the work. And we said, this is where I don't know, God runs the world, but I'm going to try and have a livelihood from this job. Hashem says that looks like a good idea or that fits into the plan. Here's your livelihood, right? Whatever it is. But it's kind of more like opening the door and saying, this is the door I'm going to try. I don't know, God, it's up to you if this is the right door or not. But this is my job. God, you do the rest. So everything that gets completed, everything that gets finished, we almost can't even call it our own because it only truly does get fulfilled through the help of Hashem. The Mishnah tells us, Im ein ani li mi li. If I'm not for myself, then who would be for me? That means I have to walk around thinking, I got to do things for myself. But at the same time, the Mishnah tells us that we have to rely on Hashem. If it's without Hashem, v'ma'ani, who am I? What am I? I'm nothing. On my own, I'm empty. So that I have to realize that on my own, I'm nothing. But I have the responsibility of trying and pushing. But at the end of the day, it's all going to come from Hashem. So when we think to ourselves, I'm thinking that Hashem created the world. There's a creator to this world. So we're trying to make that should not just be a surface level thought that is in our mind. It becomes ingrained into our heart, in our being, in our neshama, in our soul. And that consciousness, we daven to Hashem, that it should be meaningful. It should have an impact. It should be something that is sustained, that continuously comes to us, even at the most random of times. That it should just be there, something that we're automatically cognizant of, that we should be part of us. So keeping these two things in mind, that's the true success that we have. We'll eventually talk about davening more in depth, about tefillah, the concept of prayer. But just we should have this in our mind that this is something we have to use and apply to what we learned and we practiced last week, is that the true success of something is when we daven to Hashem and say, okay, I'm going to think there's a creator to the world. Now, Hashem, this is what I'm thinking, and I'm asking you, Hashem, to please allow this thought to have a meaningful and lasting effect. That should be on our mind as well. Now, again, the goal of what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a foundation in ourselves to create the idea of Bilvavi Mishkan Evna. I'll build in my heart a place for Hashem to dwell. That's where we're driving towards. We want to be a sanctuary that is ready to accept the dwelling of Hashem, that He should dwell within each and every single one of us. And that's what we're doing. And by recognizing that Hashem is the creator of the world, that's the first step that brings us to understanding that there needs to be some sort of relationship. So now we'll go to the next step. Now, just to be clear, the first step of reminding ourselves that there's a creator of the world, I don't know about, not asking, you don't have to tell me, but I know for myself that I'm not done. I'm not done with the first step. It's not finished, right? I need to still work. I'm constantly reminding myself and having more and more time where I am fully 100% aware that there's a creator in the world. And that's the first step. And without that first step, if we're not fully founded in that first step, so then later on, if we have a challenge and we're trying to figure out what it's coming from, we'd have to come all the way back to the beginning. So it's important to always realize that although we're going to move on, we're going to talk about what the next steps are, and that we can be aware of them and look at the goals, and at least we should see the path and see the progression. But we really can't move to the next step unless we're individually ready. And that'll be up to you. Each and every person will decide for themselves. Am I ready to work on the next step? You know, the first step for yourself, we know the first step is being conscious that Hashem is a creator. The next step is a very, very powerful concept, which couldn't be more apropos for the time of year that we're in. It is now Rosh Chodesh Nisan, right? We're in the month of Nisan, the month of Pesach. Pesach, we know that the Jewish nation came out of Egypt. Coming out of Egypt was a profound experience for the Jewish nation, for the Jewish people as a whole. And the things that we learn and we discuss at the Pesach Seder and that we can learn from the Haggadah and the Psukim and the Torah that talk about all of this, it's endless. It's absolutely endless. But one thing that is very clear from the story of our exodus from Egypt is the concept of hashgacha, and Hashem as divine providence, that he rules the world. Not just that he's in charge, but rather he has an intimate understanding and knowledge of what happens in each and every person's day-to-day life. Hashgacha pratis, we call it, that individual, personal, divine intervention, divine providence, so to speak. Hashem knows what's happening in your life, in your life, in your life. Each and every one of us knows exactly what's going on. He pays attention. There used to be not a very popular theory anymore, but there used to be this theory of the watchmaker theory, that there was a deity that created the world and set the clock and let it run and see you later. Nothing to do with any ins and outs that go on throughout the rest of the existence of that clock that he made. We don't believe that. We know that that's not correct. Rather, from the fact that God brought plagues that corresponded to the different things that the Egyptians made the Jewish people suffer with. And we know that God took us out and split the sea in front of us, gave us the Torah at Har Sinai. All of this is part of our experience of leaving Egypt. All of that showed a personal intervention, a personal providence that Hashem had, and knowledge of the world and its workings, and that how Hashem is constantly there. So we have to get to this step of understanding Hashem's divine providence in the world. How do we get there? So the first step is we have to believe that there's a creator. So that was step one that we did. The second step, before we can believe there's a creator, is that we have to believe that we are creations. What do I mean by that? That we are creations. Of course we're creations, right? The third step, once we know there's a creator and that we're creations, so then we have to realize that Hashem has that relationship continuously and is continuously involved in that creator-creation relationship. But what does it mean that we have to believe that we are creations? So there's a very famous idea that I'm sure I've said upstairs a few times, and it's that part of each and every one of our neshama, our soul, we have a certain spiritual DNA makeup. And that makeup was changed and altered and influenced by Abraham, by Yitzchak, by Yaakov, by the Shvatim, by the great people of our history. Their spiritual greatness is imbued into each and every one of us. And we all have parts of Abraham's chesed, his kindness. We have parts of Yitzchak, his gvura. We have Yaakov and his tiferes, all these different things, that all the different parts, the different things that they have, they're imbued in us. And we have that power. We have that essence within us. Now, what we don't usually talk about is that that's 100% true for the positive and for spiritual things. But on the flip side, there's a rule. The Torah said, the pasuk says, "Zeh leumat zeh bara Hashem." Hashem created everything. This in contrast to that. And sometimes you'll find what that means is places where you find the greatest levels of spirituality. Sometimes you find the deepest levels of impurity and things that are not so great. And there has to be a balance at all times. Anytime there's an imbalance, it would be so clear to us right now, sitting here in this room, that God is the master of the world and creator. We wouldn't really choose to serve him. It would just be obvious that we had to. And we need to choose to serve him, because that way it's more meaningful. By serving Hashem because, well, I just saw the sea split, so of course I'm going to serve him. Well, that's not as meaningful as, well, I don't see any overt miracles on a regular basis, and it's something I'm working towards and something that I'm gaining, so to speak, for myself. That's a far more meaningful service. And that's what Hashem wants from us. He wants us to choose to serve him. He wants that choice. He doesn't want to force our hand to do it. He wants us to make the right choice. And therefore, there's always this balance of positive and negative. And the same is true even for our neshama. And there's a positive balance with a negative balance that is going to be equal. So where does the negative influence in our DNA come from? So the same way the positive comes from the personalities, the great personalities of the Torah, the negative also comes from the not so great personalities of the Torah. So we have a piece of us that's like Paro, like Bilam. We have a piece of us that's like Korach, that fought against Moshe. All those different character traits, they're tucked away. They're part of us. What did Paro say? So in the Haftorah, when we read about Egypt and Moshe Rabbeinu going to Paro and saying, "Let the Jewish nation go," and the plague of blood and the frogs and that Haftorah, the pasuk says that Paro said a statement. He says, "Li Yeori," to me is the Yeor, is the Nile River, Va'ani Asisi, and I made it. Paro had this imagination, and he was convinced, he believed that he was a creator, not a created, that he had created, and he was the God that created the Nile River. So that means that within each and every one of us, we, to a sense, believe that we have the capabilities of creator, and we somehow created ourselves. Now, just to slow it down for a second, if I'd ask you, do you think you're created just like I fell off the moon? It's ridiculous, right? So we don't necessarily think of it that way. But the reason why we don't think of it that way is because we only generally look at ourselves on a more surface level. Right? We look at ourselves and I say, okay, I'm a good person. I'm an upstanding citizen. I'm a law-abiding person. I'm nice. I'm kind. I try to do the right thing. And okay, I'm not perfect. I'm not so bad. I'm not so good. Okay, well, I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't think we don't look at ourselves as hopefully it's not healthy to look at yourself like you're a bad person, right? That would be bad. So we look at ourselves and we don't see that feeling. And it's true, we don't. But let's take a step back at the world. Let's look at the world. The world believes in this concept called evolution. Evolution means that man developed from an algae cell, a piece of slime that was found in a primordial lake or pond or gathering of water that eventually developed into some sort of fish, and then over billions of years turned into something that could get on land, and then eventually get on land and grow wings and had teeth and a tree, and everything came from a cell. Right? Now, that means that not if you put the two concepts next to each other, I created myself or I was created from nothing, those aren't as far apart as you might have initially thought, right? Those are very close. So it's not that I created myself, but since I come from whatever I came from, I get to really just decide what I want. There's nothing above me. There's nothing below. I am me. I do me. Don't worry about me, right? I get to choose. I have that sense of I made this Nile, right? And that is within us. Now, we have to, let's tell you an interesting statement that Rav Yerucham Levavitz said, is the Mashgiach in the Mir Yeshiva. He said, in the heart of every man is a zoo full of animals. And we have, which refer to the character traits. We have all of the animals are there, the giraffes, the lions, the tiger, they're all there. Some of us have more anger and less desire. Some of us more desire and less anger. We have all the pieces are there. Some of them just don't manifest as much as others, and some of them may never manifest, right? But they're all there, and we have to work on all those pieces, and we have to fix and address all those little drops. So even though we may not have this same outlook that Paro did, that he was some sort of deity and he created things, but within us we have that piece. Now, if it's within us, but it's so subtle, so why do we really have to work on it? Why does it matter? Why do we have to address it? And the answer is because let's say in 10 years from now, I'm walking down the street and I get hit by a car again. Bad story. Hope it never happens. Right? God forbid, right? And what am I going to say? You know, it's like, why did this happen? You know, again. Right? Yeah, again. This is just some kind of bad joke, right? And there's no rhyme or reason to anything. And I lose sight for a moment of the idea that God runs the world, hashgacha, that Hashem has personal intervention into the entire world. As soon as I lose focus of that, I'm going to challenge, hey, Rabbi, don't you remember about God? He runs the world. Why don't I feel that real sense that God is running the world? And then I'm going to realize that I missed a basic foundation. I forgot to really entrench in myself that I'm just a created. I'm just something that was created. I'm not a creator myself. If I'm a creator myself, so then I have certain control over situations and I have certain ability to influence and manipulate my surroundings. Now, something happened that showed me that I have no control and I can't manipulate situations. So then if I didn't fully appreciate that I'm a person that was created and I still have that deep, deep feeling, so then that means I'm missing a fundamental part of my belief in Hashem and his rule over the world. So even though it might be small, we have to found it appropriately in order to progress appropriately. So that's why we're going to talk about it. That's why we're going to think about it in that way. Maybe this piece of paro in us is small. And that's great. It should be small. But if we don't address it, then what happens later might cause us to make a mistake and start addressing the wrong issues instead of realizing that there's a more fundamental problem that we have to address. So before we address how we work on that and what we do to keep our minds aware that we are created and everything around us has been created and there is a creator, we have to stop here if anybody has any questions.
So then I go to how could such horrific things happen in this world? In all societies, in the Holocaust, there's not. I mean, we have physical beings, so we feel acutely when we are tortured.
Yeah.
Physically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also.
And mentally. That's right.
So I don't know how to think about it.
So first we have to develop the relationship before we can actually really address that. You're right. It's hard to wrap our heads around. And to make it a little bit easier, since we're outside observers, so then we can say to ourselves, God has a plan. I don't understand it. Can't recognize it. I can't claim to say that I know what that plan is. But if I deeply have that connection and realize Hashem there is a creator in the world, I am a creation, and Hashem rules the world, that third step, which we're not up to just yet. But if we have that foundation built in deeply, so then even when we see things of that magnitude, we'll be able to lean on that and say, hey, this is what I know. I know there's a purpose for this. Don't understand it, but I know that Hashem is running the world. Right? The question the question generally becomes a more painful question when we don't have that peace in our mind of Hashem runs the world, right? Or we don't live with it in the same way that we're trying to really change it from just a knowledge, but to something that's in our heart.
We need to acknowledge the fact that there's a thing by using those technical changes. That's the first question. Second question.
Well, let's just one at a time. That sounds like a loaded question. So we have to.
Super rational. Beyond the rational.
Do we have to accept that God has greater rationale than we do? Is that what you're asking me?
Well, that's framing it. Saying that we need to accept the fact that there are certain things
we can't understand.
We cannot understand.
Yes.
With reason.
That starts first with God. That's right.
In order to get beyond our ego.
That's right. If I think that I have to understand everything because I don't really believe that I'm just something that was created, I don't really believe that. I have a feeling that I can do stuff, right? So then, as long as I hold on to a shred of that feeling, that paro feeling, we'll call it, so then that means that I have the right or the ability to understand and recognize everything. Now, maybe with a little bit of help, but there's got to be a way for me to figure that out. But that's not the case. And the Creator created us. He created us how we are, imperfect, with all our flaws, and He still loves us, and He would never trade us in for anything. He promised that over and over again to us, and no matter what, He'll always be there for us. Yeah. Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah.
There is no idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying that in cases where we can understand, we shouldn't try to understand. Right? If you would walk into the room that's adjacent to the room we're in, and you'd open a drawer and you see a bunch of knives, and you open a cabinet and you see a bunch of pots, you're automatically led to believe that it is a kitchen. Right? Now, if you open cabinets and drawers and you find tools and utensils that you've never seen before, does that invalidate the oven, the microwave, and the toaster, and the sink? Of course not. Just because there are things that you don't understand doesn't mean all the things that you did understand are now invalidated. Right? That kitchen is still a kitchen, even though there are tools that you don't understand. Maybe there's the chef that comes to this kitchen and he has tools that just because he's a professional, he knows what he's doing. So the things that we can understand, we should try to understand. Because Hashem wants us to have some sort of relationship with Him, right? Where we understand His motive, so to speak, and what He's trying to do for us, and what He's trying to tell us, and how He's communicating with us. He wants us to have that relationship. But it is okay to have things that we don't fully understand, because that should not invalidate everything else. If it does, that usually means that we were looking for a way out anyway. That's usually the way it goes.
Question. I can understand what you say on a personal level.
Mhm.
But when you look at the world, the Holocaust, and even today, there are horrible things happening to innocent bystanders, as it were. To say, well, God knows what he's doing, doesn't seem much of a comfort or much of an explanation.
So when it comes to comfort, right?
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, just imagine there was a Holocaust survivor sitting right here. For me to say what I just said would be profoundly insensitive, right? Rav Matzah Solomon is the mashgiach in the Lakewood Yeshiva. He should have a refuah shleima. He's not so well. He's an old man. He should have a full recovery. A tremendous individual. Really had a tremendously deep insight on human nature and understood people. I take a course. Start with a story like that. I take a course on Sundays. It's what's called a mashgiach training course. I'm not mashgiach as far as kashrus, but mashgiach as far as mashgiach ruchani, a spiritual guide to help our students in school. Okay? In the training course, we have 3 hours every Sunday, and we're learning about different mental health issues. And we had a class on OCD and anxiety. We had a class. Yes, last week's class was with a psychiatrist. We talked about all the different types of ADHD medications and all sorts of things. There's a doctor. His name is Dr. Pelkovitz, and he's a very well-known psychologist. And he said that there was he was called in for a boy. A boy went to sleepaway camp and was molested by a camp counselor. Okay, and they figured it out. So I think the counselor went to jail, if I'm not mistaken. And this kid now needed tremendous help. So they called Dr. Pelkovitz. Dr. Pelkovitz said, call Rabbi Solomon, Rabbi Tzio Solomon first. I'll meet together with you. You'll talk to Rabbi Tzio Solomon, and then we'll take it from there. He met this boy first. For a few minutes, talked to the kid. And then this boy went to Rabbi Tzio Solomon, who was in the room next door. And Rabbi Tzio spent half an hour with him. The kid came out and went back home with his family. The next week, when they had the next session with Rabbi Solomon and Dr. Pelkovitz, the kid came in and looked like an entirely different kid. Like at the beginning, he was almost like a fetal position, like curled up on a chair, could not make any eye contact with adults. He was just so traumatized, terrible. And then suddenly looked almost as if nothing had happened. He says, "You look amazing. What happened?" He said, "Well, Rabbi Solomon told me that my soul is 100% pure. It's not tainted at all. And he told me that anything that was done to me had nothing to do with me. It was not my fault. He told me to learn a specific thing and to make sure I learned that every night. It was a short thing, and I learned it every night. And he showed me that there's still good and truth and purpose within me." And Dr. Pelkman's like, "I work with kids for months and months and months, and then maybe they start to look like this." He did it in half an hour, one meeting, the first time he ever met. It's unbelievable individual. So he said in a public, he was talking to hundreds and hundreds of people in the yeshiva. It was one of his shiurim that he gave in the yeshiva, and he said, "There's a time and place for everything." So back to the point, there's a time and place, he said, even for heresy. So when is there a time for heresy? If you go to the bedside of the person that's dying of cancer, you don't say God has a plan, it's okay. You say, "This doesn't make any sense, and this is terrible for you. I can't even imagine what you sympathize with that." And you express things that, even though deep down in your heart you know that there is a plan and God does know, but you have to be there for that person. So as a way of comfort, you're right. That's not a way of comfort. You can't comfort people with that. It's true. But from an intellectual perspective, we don't have to comfort ourselves. I mean, at least generally, we don't have to comfort ourselves. We didn't experience it that way. So, but we do have to be able to rationalize and make sense. So that sometimes we can't make sense of things, and we have to be able to accept that. That's by way of comfort. Sure.
The idea that humans are co-creators or partners with Hashem in the universe.
Yeah.
So,
how does that relate to this? That's a fair question. So what Mark is referring to is, for example, the Gemara uses expressions. I'm not sure exactly which Gemara you're referring to. It uses a few times One example is that in a child, okay, a child, that mother, father, and Hashem are partners in creation, in creating this child. So there, it more means from a physical stance. Right? Mother and father did create this child from a physical perspective. That's what we said at the beginning. That was the inspiration, so to speak, in our world that required Hashem to be part of it because we can't complete it on our own. We needed Hashem to help complete that picture, to finish it off, so to speak. So that's what it means in that sense. Other times where the Gemara says the terminology of judges who judge appropriately, they're nasa shutef la'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they become partners with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in judgment. So we have to realize that, I can explain it to you. What it means is that the same way God created the world with judgment in mind, that things had to be judged fairly and appropriately, when they do that, they express their godliness within them also. Okay? It never means that we are creators in the fashion of we can create something from nothing. Right? That it never means. The Gemara language and terminology has to be something that we get used to. The same way if you walk into a laboratory, physics or chemistry laboratory, probably better, a chemistry lab, and you'd see one scientist talking to another, and the floor is made of concrete. The scientist says, "Guess what I'm standing on?" And the other scientist says, "Water." And he says, "Good one. That's right. You got it right." And you look at them, you guys are nuts. Water is just in concrete. He said, what is the understanding behind it? Behind it is the water bonds in the concrete are actually what make the concrete solid. It's a fascinating science tidbit. Look it up. It's unbelievable how it's in fact the H2O bonds that give certain concretes their solidity. So they just used expressions that they're familiar with, but to you and me would look ridiculous because we're not in the world. We have to get into their world before we can start understanding and judging what they say. Same as with Gemara, with the Torah, with everything about Judaism. We've got to get into the world. Before we get into the world, to observe it objectively and say, I understand what they mean, and therefore I'm going to criticize, or I can guess what they say. We're not in the world yet. We have no idea what they're saying. It's like saying I'm standing on water when you're standing on concrete. And so that's all those examples always have some sort of understanding, because that was the language that Chazal used to communicate certain ideas. Okay, so officially I don't want to keep you too long, so we'll get to this last piece of entrenching within ourselves that we are not creators, but we have been created. So the Chafetz Chaim, it is said that Chafetz Chaim, when he would have feelings of a laxity in his belief in Hashem, he would open a Chumash and he would read the first few psukim in the Torah. Now, you and I both know, or all of us know, that Chafetz Chaim knew those psukim by heart. He didn't need to be reminded and to remember what are the first 6 psukim in the Torah. He knew them by heart. Okay? There was no need for him to review them. So what was he doing? What he was doing was he was going back to the basics, just like we're doing. Going back to the basics, not things that we don't know, things that we know. We just have to build them and entrench them into our neshama, into our hearts, that we can create this bilvavi mishkan ev, we can build in our heart this sanctuary for Hashem to dwell. So we're going to do the same thing. Okay? Let's read the first pasuk in the Torah, Bereshis, in the beginning, before everything. Bara, created. What does the word created mean? It means there's a being that's creating. So who created? What created? Elokim, Hashem created. That was the first step, that God created the world. Now, what did he create? Es Hashemayim, the Es Haaretz. He created the land and the sky, or the sky and the land. Created everything around us. So if we're going to recognize that we are things that have been created, we have to attribute that thought to every single thing around us. Who created the chair that I'm sitting on? Sure, it was man that put it together physically, that downstairs inspiration, so to speak. But the reason why somebody came up with the whole folding idea and the cushions and all those pieces were ideas that were put in from Hashem to give this person the idea. The reason why there's a table that's made like this and constructed like that, sure, it was man that did it at the end, but behind the scenes, the beginning of it all was Hashem inspiring that person, giving him the idea to do this and to do that. All those things that we've mentioned at the beginning, connecting the end result with the fact that we put in a piece, but Hashem helped us complete it. It was only completed because Hashem was there. So when we look at everything around us, we say the sky, who created the sky above my head? God created the sky above my head. Who created the land, the street that I'm walking on? God created the street that I'm walking on. Who created everything around me? God created the things that are around me.
So who created the bad stuff?
Also God. That's also God. It's also. In fact, the Gemara says that rabbis teach us that God created the evil inclination and in some sense regretted it, whatever that means. But now that it's there, he says, okay, I gave you the evil inclination. I'll give you the Torah so you can take care of it. So everything is part of the plan, right? It's true. That's absolutely correct. And how that works and why that works, that's the next step of hashgacha, of recognizing his divine intervention. But all those things, we have to realize all those things were put here by Hashem. Absolutely. So everything we think of, everything we see, everything we look at, God created this, God created that. So when I think to myself also, there's a creator in the world, I also think, and he created me. So it's the same exercise, we'll use that same mashal, that same example that we use with Rabbi Akiva, the rock and the water. The water drips, it's the same drop over and over again. So if we pierce the one rock with the thought of there's a creator, we have to pierce the next rock with the same drop of water, pierce the next rock with a different drop, but each drop, one after the other, will be the same. God created me, God created the land, God created the sky, God created everything around me. And that's something that is, in a sense, very easy to do because everything is always around us. It's always around us. There's not a time where you're not surrounded by something. There's almost never, you can't peek out a window and see a beautiful sky that's above our head and just walk outside and see the street that you're standing on. Everything is all around us. So the first step that we have is that we remind ourselves, God, there is a creator. That's number one. Number two, the step that we're working on this week is that everything is a creation. There's a bore, there's a creator, the yesh nivra, and they have been created. Everything else has been created, including ourselves. And the more we entrench into our neshama and our hearts that we have been created, the more we uproot the paro that's within us, and we realize that there's a creator and we are his creations. Then, once we have that understanding, then we can come the next time, God willing, we'll talk about Hashem's intervention on a day-to-day basis. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope everybody enjoyed, and if there's any questions, I'll do my best to try and answer.
So after for